Everyone, and welcome to our last week of the term. I want to begin by saying that you all have done a fantastic job. It has been a pleasure to spend time with you and to read through all that you have engaged with and submitted. It's been so important, the work that we have all done together, and to see how this comes to an end is bittersweet, right? As you move forward into your program, you have all by now engaged with very difficult social welfare issues. I was reading through a lot of what you submitted, and I began to think about how much we struggle to come up with words to say that some of these policies sometimes don't work for everybody. And some of the communities are probably not making use of these programs because they don't know about them or they're not accessible. And then at the same time, I'm proud of all the work that you've done in examining policies that affect real communities and practice thinking like social work advocates. So as we culminate in this class, I just want to say that I'm proud of everything that is coming together. We're moving from research and evaluation to action as we come in contact with the topics this week. The assignment this week is a policy brief, and this is an opportunity for you to take a social welfare program and explain why it matters, who it benefits, and also using the evidence to support your decision and recommend a policy or program change, right? So the goal is to go beyond saying this is a problem to going and maybe explaining what the issue is, what evidence shows that this is an issue, and where the policy or program is falling short, and culminating into the action that should be taken. So with that, I want to begin sharing the lesson this week. Let's see if we can bring it up. There we go. And so the policy advocacy and practice, creating an action plan for change, is the objective of this last week. So we want to talk about going beyond the issue and looking at a real actionable program change. What are we going to be doing this week? We're going to be discussing two topics as usual in the forum and a final assignment. And I'm going to go step by step so you know what you're going to be doing. So DQ1 is really talking about relationships, right? We are explaining the relationship between policy and program evaluation approaches. So I want you to think of evaluation as a cycle. Policy sets the goals. It tells us who is eligible, what services are funded, what rules apply, and what outcomes to that we were expected, right? So program evaluation asks whether those goals work in practice, right? So that's what you're going to be doing for DQ1. And then we're going to talk about a little bit of evaluation and that connection to the ASWB, right? Why are we talking about this? Why is it important? So the end of your program, you will be preparing for certification. And evaluation is one of those areas that students sometimes overlook. The exam may ask you to recognize how programs are assessed, how outcomes are measured, and how evaluation findings are used to improve practice. So evaluation is the bridge between policy intent and real world impact. A policy can have a strong purpose, but we still have to ask, right? Is it working? Is it reaching the right people? Is it producing the intended outcomes? Is it creating unintended barriers? So we're going to be working with this, and a little exam note that I want to let you guys know. The exam resources are changing for exams administered on or after August 3rd of this year. So make sure you're studying from the guide that matches your testing date. And so this matters because preparing with the wrong material maybe can create confusion. So use the most current ASWB resources and confirm which version applies to you before you take that test. All right, so discussion 2, how social workers influence policy directly, right? You're being able to ask to explain strategies and techniques social workers can use to inform and influence policy, right? So, for example, the organizational level, this may include changing agency procedures, intake forms, eligibility workflows, referral pathways, all sorts of things. At the broader social policy level, this may include legislative advocacy, public testimony, public comments, maybe community organizing. Those are different. The key is to think about how social workers move from observing a problem to advocating for change. Okay. So for your post, do not only list strategies, but discuss the advantages and disadvantages. Some strategies are fast but limited. Some are powerful but take longer. And some require public advocacy. Others require internal collaboration. There are many things that are working for these things to come to fruition. Now, let's talk a little bit in more detail about the assignment, which is the policy brief, which is our final policy product, right? The policy brief is your final product for this course. So take your time with it. This is different from the literature review you did last week, right? So this had the literature review from last week helped you gather the scholarly evidence. And now the policy brief asks you to translate that evidence into a recommendation for a decision maker, okay? So that means your writing should be clear, to the point, and audience centered. So example, your reader may be a legislator or an agency leader or a school administrator, or any other person who has the ability to influence policy or service delivery, right? This is where I want you to challenge yourself. Do not write as if you are only writing to your instructor, me, right, for the school, for this assignment. Write it as if someone with decision-making power is reading your brief and needs to understand what action to take. So the audience should be able to quickly understand the issue, right? Why it matters, what evidence supports your position, and what change you're recommending. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about strategies. Okay. Not every policy change happens through legislation. Sometimes the most immediate and meaningful change happens inside your agency or your school or clinic, shelter, nonprofit, or community organization. Actually, it almost always happens that way. Social workers can examine those organizational policies for bias, for example, or exclusion, or unnecessary burdens. So we can ask, I don't know, are intake forms too complicated for our clients? Maybe. Are services only offered during hours that working families can attend? Let's talk about that. So social workers can use client feedback or their service data to practice experience and proposed change. Okay. Strategies in the public arena. Social workers also influence public decision making. Meeting with elected officials is an example. Participating in coalitions or providing testimony, submitting public comments, writing policy briefs. We can also use storytelling and data together. Stories help humanize the issue, so we can establish credibility and scope. We can do this in the classroom too, where we're engaging with different systems within a school board or in a classroom. We can talk about access, equity, well-being of the students and the families. So when you write about policy change strategies, think about the strengths and limitations of each of the approaches. So the policy change argument, we want to name the problem carefully. We want to identify the population that's affected. We want to explain what the current policy or service delivery system fails to address. We want to use credible evidence and current data. You should have done this in your previous assignment. When you propose a practical change and explain why it is feasible. And finally, you close with a specific call to action. A strong policy brief is not emotional alone, although you can use that, but it is driven by evidence. And it's also not data alone, right? It brings together the evidence, the ethical reasoning, that emotional experience, and a realistic recommendation. Okay. So the policy brief assignment in specific, you must use the template attached to the assignment. The product is a concise policy brief. It's not a traditional research paper, all right? So you don't have to worry about APA title page or anything like that. Just follow the template. You also need to identify a specific audience. This is important. A policy brief should be written to someone who can influence policy, who can influence funding or service delivery. Your audience must be either a legislator or agency administrator, school board member, or a program director, maybe a hospital leader, a community coalition, or another decision maker. And you should use the same social issue that you used for your literature review from last week. Remember that. So the work you already did should support this final product. Okay. Let's see. What are the 3 required components? Let's talk more specifically about that. The first component is the executive summary. This is a memorable overview of the issue, the most serious policy failures or insights, or the focus of your recommendations, and the direction of your argument. The second component is the main analytical content. This is where you explain the evidence that you already gathered from last week, policy context, critique, alternatives, benefits, recommendations. Third component is your reference section. You need APA citations throughout the brief, right? Because you already gathered some of this, and a full APA reference list that goes at the end. APA style, again, is not required for the body format in the same way it would or has been for the previous papers that we've done here. But your source documentation still needs to follow APA guidelines. So your references, your in-text citations, if you need to include those, must be APA. That must be an APA. So remember that the brief is strategic and evidence-based, and the reader should not have to guess what the problem is, why it matters, or what actions you are recommending. Executive summary is one of the most important parts of your policy brief. You might want to look at examples online on how that looks or what it entails. But what it is that some decision makers may only read that executive summary before deciding whether to continue to read. That's why it's so important. That means the section needs to be clear, focused and compelling. You don't use too many words to say the same thing. You are concise and to the point. You describe the specific issue. You explain the most serious policy failure or insight you identify, and you explain the main focus of your recommendations. So you keep your tone concise, urgent, professional, audience friendly. One strategy I recommend is writing the executive summary last. Very interesting, because I've done a few of these. I always do them last, even though it appears first on your document, of course. It is often easier, I've learned, to write after you have completed the full brief. That way, your summary matches your final arguments, right? So if the executive summary were the only section someone reads, would they understand the problem and the recommendation, the recommended action? That's how you know, okay? And before submitting, obviously, check that you are using the template. It is the same topic from last week. Keep the brief concise and within the required format. Did you identify the specific audience? Did you include the executive summary, analytic content, and references? Did you use APA citations and references correctly? And did you submit it to LooksRight? Don't submit a traditional essay here. This is a policy brief, okay? That is one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in the assignment is they submit a cover page and all the things. This is like if you were submitting it to a decision maker. Another mistake that I see is that it's not connected to your previous topic 7 literature review. So the 5 scholarly sources you selected before should help support your issue now. And before you submit, read your brief from the perspective of your intended audience. Ask yourself, would this person understand what I'm talking about? Or what I'm asking them to do? All right, so this is what that template looks like, or instructions and information on what to do and how specific this policy brief looks like. And these are references and resources that you can utilize to help you draft your papers and your discussions. And as you finish the week, reach out. I am always an email or text away. And you can let me know if you have any issues with any of these topics. And once again, I'm really proud of all the work that you have done. You are so prepared and ready to move forward that I hope you keep in touch and we'll see each other around, hopefully. Best of luck. Bye-bye.